There is someone in your life who smiles when you succeed and feels something else entirely. You have felt it, that almost imperceptible shift in their energy when good news lands. The congratulations that arrives a fraction too late. The question that redirects attention just as the moment peaks. The way the conversation moves on, slightly faster than it should. You noticed it. And then you told yourself you were imagining things. You were not imagining things. In this video, we are going to examine one of the most documented and least discussed psychological phenomena in human relationships. The person who, at some level, needs you to fail. Who they are, why they are, and most importantly, how to see them clearly before they cost you something. Introduction. There is a German word that has no direct English equivalent, Schadenfreude. It means pleasure derived from another person's misfortune. And when most people encounter this word, they treat it as a curiosity, a quirk of human nature, perhaps slightly embarrassing, but essentially harmless. Psychology disagrees. Research published in Science documented what happens in the brain when a person witnesses the failure of someone they envy. The reward centers activate. The same neural pathways that light up when you receive a gift, win a competition, or eat something pleasurable. Those pathways fire when someone you resent fails. This is not a metaphor. This is neurochemistry. The brain of a resentful person experiences your failure as a reward, which means, and this is the part that most people resist accepting, that some people in your life are not neutral observers of your outcomes. They have a stake, a biological, neurochemical stake in what happens to you. And that stake is not always in your favor. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote extensively about what he called resentment, a French word he used to describe a specific psychological orientation in which a person defines their own value not by what they achieve, but by the failures of those around them. The resentful person does not rise. They wait for others to fall. Today, we are going to examine 3 types of people who carry this orientation, sometimes consciously, usually not. We are going to look at how each type operates, how to recognize them, and what to do when you find one in your life. 3 types, each more subtle than the last, and by the end, you will have a framework that makes the previously invisible visible. Part 1. The competitor who never told you. There was a competition. Who they are. The first type is the most common. You almost certainly know one. You may have known several. They present as a peer, a colleague, a friend, someone at roughly your level, similar background, similar ambitions, similar starting point. The relationship feels like mutual support, like 2 people moving through the same landscape together. But there is something you do not know. For this person, your relationship has always been a competition, not a collaboration, not a friendship with occasional rivalry. A competition with a scoreboard they maintain privately and consult constantly. You did not agree to enter this competition. You were never informed it existed. That does not matter. It is happening. And your success registers on their scoreboard as their loss. How they behave, the behavioral signature of this type is subtle enough that most people dismiss it repeatedly before they finally name it. When you share good news, their response contains a redirect. Not immediately, the initial reaction may be entirely warm, but within 60 seconds, the conversation moves to something they are doing, something they have achieved, something that re-establishes equilibrium on their private scoreboard. When you fail, something changes. Their attention increases. Their engagement deepens. They ask more questions, show more interest, spend more time with you. The failure has made you easier to be around. It has closed the gap, and the closing of the gap is experienced neurochemically as relief. They will rarely say anything overtly negative about your success. They have too much social intelligence for that. What they do instead is qualify. The achievement is acknowledged but contextualized. It was lucky. It was timing. It was the environment. The specific quality that makes the achievement yours is always the thing that gets explained away. The psychology behind it. Tarus, Leon Festinger's social comparison theory, developed in the 1950s and extensively validated since, proposes that human beings evaluate their own abilities and opinions primarily by comparing them to others. We do not have an absolute measure of our own value. We measure ourselves against the people around us. For most people, this comparison process is largely unconscious and relatively benign. For the covert competitor, it has become the primary mechanism of self-evaluation. Their sense of their own worth is entirely relative, which means your gains are their losses. Not metaphorically, psychologically. Their self-image literally decreases when yours increases. This is why they cannot simply be happy for you. Happiness for you, in their psychological framework, requires a reduction in their own value. And the self-protection instinct, which is one of the most fundamental drives in human psychology, makes that reduction feel intolerable. Do you know how to recognize them? The clearest diagnostic is the attention pattern. Track whether this person's interest in you increases or decreases in proportion to your success. If they become more engaged, more present, more attentive when things are going badly, and subtly less available, less warm, less interested when things are going well, you are looking at the covert competitor. The second diagnostic is the redirect. After you share something positive, count how long before the conversation returns to them. If it is consistently under 90 seconds, the redirect is not casual. It is structural. Part 2. The person who built their identity on your limitations. Who they are. The second type is found most often in close relationships. Family, long-term friendships, partnerships that began when both people were at a similar level and evolved as one person grew and the other did not. This person does not experience your success as competition. They experience it as abandonment. When you began the relationship, you and this person occupied a shared identity space. You were both struggling, or both ordinary, or both constrained by the same limitations. The shared limitation was part of the bond, part of what made the relationship feel safe and equal. When you began to change, to grow, to achieve, to move beyond the shared limitation, something shifted in the relationship that neither of you may have fully named. Your growth threatened the shared identity. It implied that the limitation was not fixed, that it was a choice, that they could have moved beyond it too. And that implication is one of the most psychologically threatening things one person can present to another. How they behave. This type does not want you to fail in the way a competitor wants you to fail. They want you to return, to come back to the shared level, to confirm that the limitation was real and that your escape from it was temporary or illusory. Their behavior reflects this. They minimize your achievements, not competitively, but protectively. They emphasize risk, instability, the the ways things could go wrong. They remind you of who you were before. They are most comfortable with you when you are struggling, not because they enjoy your pain, but because your struggle confirms the shared story. They may actively discourage new directions, not from malice, from genuine anxiety. Your growth destabilizes their self-concept. If you can change, then their stasis is a choice, and choices carry responsibility in a way that fixed limitations do not. The psychology behind it. Alfred Adler, whose work on inferiority and compensation remains foundational to modern psychology, identified what he called the safeguarding tendency, the psychological mechanisms people use to protect their sense of self-worth from threatening information. For the person who built their identity on shared limitations, your success is threatening information. It cannot simply be accepted. It must be managed. And the management takes the form of subtly, but persistently, working to return the relationship to the equilibrium that made their self-concept stable. This is not malicious, it is self-protective. But the effect on you is the same, regardless of the motivation. The person who needs you to return to your limitations will, consciously or not, create pressure in that direction, through doubt, through nostalgia for who you were, through a version of care that is most available when you are small. The hardest part, what makes this type the most emotionally difficult, is that the relationship is often genuine. The care is real. The history is real. The person is not performing warmth, they feel it. But the warmth is most available at your lowest points, and it recedes, slightly but reliably, as you rise. This creates a pull, emotional, relational, almost gravitational, toward remaining at the level where the love is most accessible. This is what Nietzsche understood about resentment that most modern psychology has missed. The most powerful resentment is not hostile. It is loving. It is the resentment of someone who genuinely cares about you, but cannot tolerate the version of you that has moved beyond where they are. Two types. The third is the one you will find hardest to believe, because from the outside, they look like your biggest supporter. Part 3. The supporter who needs you almost successful. Who they are. The third type is the most sophisticated and the most dangerous. They present as your supporter, your advocate, the person who believed in you before anyone else did. They encouraged you when you were starting. They pushed you when you doubted yourself. They are, in the conventional sense, on your side. But there is a specific threshold above which their support becomes unreliable, a level of success beyond which something changes. Subtle, difficult to name, but present. A cooling, a slight withdrawal, a new set of doubts that emerges precisely when you are closest to something significant. This person does not need you to fail. They need you almost successful. Successful enough to validate their investment in you. Not successful enough to no longer need them. How they behave. The behavioral signature of this type is the timing of their doubt. When you are struggling, their confidence in you is unconditional. When you are succeeding, new reservations appear. The concerns they raise are always framed as care. They do not want you to get hurt, to overextend, to build on an unstable foundation. The language is supportive. The effect is destabilizing. They are most enthusiastic about your potential. They are less enthusiastic about your actuality. Potential requires them. Actuality does not. Watch what happens when you succeed without their help. when a break comes through a connection they did not provide, or an achievement occurs in an area they did not encourage. The response is not quite what you would expect from someone who genuinely wants the best for you. There is something slightly off, a fractional delay in the warmth, a mild but noticeable shift in their relationship to your success. The psychology behind it. Erik Erikson's work on generativity, the psychological need to guide and invest in the next generation or in others who are developing, identified something important that is rarely discussed in its shadow form. Genuine generativity celebrates the full independence of the person being supported. The mentor, who has truly internalized generativity, wants their mentee to surpass them, wants them to no longer need guidance, experiences their independence as the completion of the project, not its end. The shadow form of generativity is what happens when the supporter's own sense of value is dependent on being needed. When the supported person's growth is welcome up to the point where they become self-sufficient and quietly threatening beyond that point. This person invested in you, and like all investors, they expect a return. The return they expect is not financial, it is psychological. It is the ongoing confirmation that their investment was necessary, that without them, you would not be where you are, that the dependency, in some form, continues. The tell. The diagnostic for this type is the question: does this person celebrate my independence, or do they celebrate my need? When you solve a problem without them, do they respond with joy or with a subtle repositioning, a reminder of what they contributed, a reframing that maintains their centrality to your story? When you outgrow their advice, do they encourage you to seek better counsel, or do they find new ways to remain relevant? Genuine support has no stake in your dependency. It gives freely and releases freely. The shadow supporter gives generously but holds tightly. And the holding, in the long run, costs you more than the giving was ever worth. The three people, where you find them. Before we reach the tools, I want to place these three types in the contexts where they most commonly appear, because recognizing the type is easier when you know where to look. The covert competitor. You find this type most often in professional environments and peer groups. The colleague who seems like a friend. The person in your industry who follows your career with slightly too much attention. The peer from your training or education who tracks your progress against theirs. The relationship is real. The rivalry is hidden. The cost comes when you mistake the relationship for the unconditional support it resembles. The identity anchor. You find this type most often in long-term relationships. Family members, childhood friends, partners from an earlier chapter of your life. The person who knew you when, whose relationship with you was formed around a version of yourself you have since moved beyond. The love is real. The pull is real. The cost comes when you allow the pull to determine your ceiling. The shadow supporter. You find this type most often in mentoring relationships, in close friendships built around one person's growth, in any relationship where one person has invested significantly in another's development. The investment is real. The care is real. The cost comes when you mistake their enthusiasm for your potential as enthusiasm for your actualization, which is a different thing entirely. What you do with this. I want to say something clearly before giving you the tools. Nothing in this video is an argument for cynicism. The three types we examined are not villains. They are people with psychological needs that happen to conflict with your growth. Understanding that distinction matters, both for how you respond and for how you protect yourself. The goal is not to eliminate these relationships from your life. Sometimes that is the right decision, but sometimes the right decision is to understand the dynamic clearly enough that you stop being shaped by it unconsciously. Awareness, in many cases, is sufficient. Debates, Tool 1, the Success Audit, course. For every significant relationship in your life, ask one question. How does this person respond when things go well for me? Not when you are struggling. Most people perform well in crisis. When things are genuinely good. When you have achieved something real. When the trajectory is clearly upward. The response in that moment is the most accurate single data point available about the nature of the relationship. Not what they say, the quality of the response, the timing, the energy. What happens in the 60 seconds after you share good news? Substance. Tool 2, the pattern over time. A single response is not a diagnosis. A pattern is. Over 6 months, notice whether your significant relationships feel lighter or heavier as you grow. Whether the people around you expand as you expand, or whether they create subtle but persistent pressure toward the level at which you began. You are looking for directionality, not individual moments. The direction the relationship pulls over time toward your growth or away from it is the most reliable indicator of its actual nature. Tool 3, the independence test. For each significant relationship, notice how the other person responds when you succeed without their involvement. When you solve a problem they did not help with. When an opportunity arrives through a channel they did not provide. When you make a decision they were not part of. Genuine investment in your well-being produces genuine joy at your independence. The shadow forms produce something else. A subtle repositioning, a slight withdrawal, a new set of concerns that emerges precisely when you demonstrate you do not need them. Outro. The people who need you to fail are not always your enemies. Sometimes they are people who love you and cannot metabolize your growth. Sometimes they are peers who measure their worth against yours and cannot afford for the measurement to go badly. Sometimes they are people who invested in you and cannot separate their care from their need to remain necessary. In almost every case, the resentment is not really about you. It is about what your success reveals to them about their own choices, their own limitations, their own unlived possibilities. You are not the target. You are the mirror. What dark psychology offers is not permission to distrust everyone. It is the ability to see clearly what is actually happening, so that you can make decisions based on reality rather than on the story the relationship tells about itself. The people who genuinely want you to succeed will be obvious once you know what to look for. Their response to your success feels different. It is unconditional. It does not require management. It does not come with a subtle cost. Find those people. Stay close to them. That is all for today. Disclaimer. This channel explores dark psychology, philosophy, and human behavior for educational and entertainment purposes only. Content is not intended as professional psychological, legal, or personal advice. Always consult a qualified professional for guidance specific to your situation. The character, Roman Gray, is a fictional persona created for this channel. All scripts, research, editorial direction, and visual concepts are entirely original, independently written, and produced by hand. Copyright Darkwise. All rights reserved.